the fall of 1996, I was 34 years old, freshly divorced, and running a 2-bay garage on the edge of Caldwell, Ohio. When my marriage ended, I didn't want the house my ex-wife and I had bought together, so I picked up a foreclosure out past the county line for almost nothing. An old brick farmhouse, 1 story, sitting alone on 4 acres with a leaning tobacco barn out back. The realtor called it a project. My buddy Dale from the garage called it a mistake with good bones. I just wanted somewhere quiet. The place needed work. Knob and tube wiring in half the walls, a water heater older than my truck, and wallpaper in the front room that had probably been hung during the Eisenhower administration. I spent my evenings after the garage closed scraping paint and running new outlets, listening to a stack of cassette tapes on an old boombox I kept on the kitchen counter. No cable out that far. Just a tube television with a bent antenna that pulled in 2.5 channels if the weather cooperated. I liked it that way. After 9 years of a marriage that ended with more silence than shouting, I wanted a place where nobody expected anything from me. I got quiet. I did not get peace. The first night, I heard scraping. Not inside the walls, outside low, near the foundation under my bedroom window. I told myself it was a raccoon working at the crawlspace vent. I had a window air conditioner unit propped in that window, and old fetters that rattled when the compressor kicked on, and I figured the sound was just the unit settling in its frame. I didn't get up. I should have. The second night, the scraping came back, and this time it woke me all the way up. I lay still and listened. Like someone dragging a tool along brick, slow and careful, like they didn't want to be heard, but couldn't help making some noise. Then nothing. I got up, pulled back the curtain, and saw nothing but my own dark yard and the shape of the barn against a sky with no moon. In the morning, I found a groove scratched into the mortar between 2 bricks, right below my window, about a foot off the ground. Fresh. White dust from the mortar had fallen into the grass. Whoever had done it hadn't just been scraping to scrape. The groove ran along the seam like somebody working a joint loose, testing it, trying to pry something free that had been set into the wall a long time ago. I figured kids. Caldwell wasn't a big town, maybe 3,000 people, and kids got bored out in the county. I mentioned it to my neighbor, Earl Boggs, an old widower who lived a 1/4 mile down the gravel road and who'd farmed that whole stretch since before I was born. Earl was on his porch swing when I brought it up, and something crossed his face before he answered. "Who owned this place before the bank took it?" I asked him. "Pruitt's," he said. "Ray Pruitt and his brother Dale. Ray passed 6 years back now. Dale, I couldn't tell you, left the county a long time ago." He didn't say much else, and I didn't push. I had a garage to run and a house to fix up, and I chalked the whole thing up to teenagers and bad luck. The third night, I set up something simple. I ran a length of fishing line from a stake in the ground to a row of jingle bells I'd bought at the hardware store, tied loosely along the foundation under my window. Cheap trick, but effective. Anybody walking that path would trip it, and I'd hear. At 2:20 in the morning, the bells rang. I was up and at the window with my flashlight before the sound had even faded. The beam caught a shape moving away from the house, low and fast, cutting toward the tree line at the edge of my property. Not a raccoon, a person, hunched over, wearing something dark. Gone into the trees before I could get a second look. I called the sheriff's department from my kitchen phone, the cordless one that never held a charge past 10 at night, so I had to switch to the wall unit halfway through the call. A deputy came out the next afternoon, walked the property, found nothing but my own footprints and a disturbed patch of leaves at the tree line. He was polite about it. He also clearly thought I was a lonely, divorced man, imagining things in an old house. I didn't blame him. I'd have thought the same. That week, I started keeping a written log on a legal pad by the bed. Date, time, what I heard, what I found. Habit from working the garage, where you write down everything a customer tells you about a noise their car makes, because half the time the details matter more than the story. Night 4, no sound at all. I almost let myself relax. Night 5, I found a flower pot moved. I didn't even have flowers in it. It was an old terracotta pot Ray Pruitt must have left behind sitting empty under the window. It had been shifted maybe 8 inches to the left, and underneath, in the dirt where it used to sit, somebody had pressed their fingers into the ground, like they'd been feeling around for something. And when I crouched down to look closer, I saw it, a thin strip of tin, the kind you'd cut from a coffee can lid, wedged down into that scraped-out mortar joint under the window, like it had been hidden there and then dug back out. I didn't think much of it that night. I wish I had. I mentioned the pot and the groove in the brick to Earl, too. This time he didn't dodge it. Ray used to keep money hid, Earl said, rocking slow on the swing. Old-timer habit. Didn't trust banks after '82 when the Farmers Trust in Cambridge folded and half the county lost their savings. He kept cash in the house somewhere. Everybody knew it. Nobody knew where. You think somebody's looking for Ray's money? I think, Earl said, that Dale Pruitt never had 2 nickels to rub together, and I think he knows this house better than you do. That gave me something to think about, and it wasn't the only thing that week. Loretta, the mail carrier who ran our route in a mud-splattered station wagon, flagged me down at my box a couple days later. "You had a fella walking your lane the other morning," she said, real early before I even started my route. Thought maybe he was a hunter, but he wasn't dressed for it. No blaze orange, no equipment that suggested he was hunting. Just walked the tree line along your property and then cut back out toward the county road. I asked if she'd gotten a good look at him. She said not really. Thin build, gray coat, moved like a man who didn't want to be looked at. I wrote it all down on the legal pad that night, under the date, the way I'd started writing everything down. Around the same time, somebody from the county sheriff's auxiliary dropped off a stack of neighborhood watch flyers, the kind with a cartoon eyeball on top and a list of phone numbers to call if you saw anything unusual. Earl told me they got handed out every few years whenever a rash of break-ins hit the townships, then forgotten about until the next time. I taped mine to the inside of my kitchen cabinet, mostly so I'd stop losing the emergency number and didn't think much more of it. Looking back, I wish I'd paid closer attention to whatever had prompted them to print a fresh batch that particular fall. Then came the phone call. It was a Tuesday, close to midnight, and the phone rang on the kitchen wall. I picked it up expecting Dale, my Dale, from the garage, since he sometimes called about a job we had running late. Instead, there was just breathing on the other end, slow and even, like someone standing close to the receiver and not saying anything. I said hello twice, nothing back. Then a click and the dial tone. I checked my answering machine the next morning out of habit, even though nothing had been recorded, and found the outgoing tape had been rewound to the very beginning, sitting right at the start of my own voice. I hadn't touched it in weeks. That detail bothered me, but not as much as what I found 10 minutes later, once I actually started looking instead of just standing there. The latch on the kitchen window over the sink, an old thumb-turn latch, the kind you could work loose with a putty knife if you knew what you were doing, was sitting turned halfway, not locked and not fully open, just hanging in that in-between position a latch settles into when somebody's worked it from outside and not bothered to set it back right. And on the linoleum below the sink, faint but there if the morning light hit it at the right angle, was the ghost of a boot print. Damp when it was made, dry by the time I found it, but the tread was clear enough. A work boot, narrow, smaller than my own size 11. I stood in my own kitchen for a long time that morning, just looking at that print on the floor, doing the math. The phone had rung close to midnight. I'd gone to bed around 11:30, which meant that whoever made that print had been standing inside my house, a room away from where I was sleeping, close enough to reach into the cabinet and touch a machine that sat 6 feet from my bed. He hadn't taken anything. He hadn't needed to. He just wanted to know he could get in, and now I knew it too. I changed the locks that day, every one of them, and I put a hook and eye latch on the inside of the bedroom door on top of that. I also started sleeping with a baseball bat leaned against the nightstand, which felt foolish and necessary at the same time. And some nights I lay there listening to the house settle and thought about that boot print more than I thought about the scraping outside. Outside, at least, I could see coming. Inside was different. Inside meant he'd already decided the walls between us didn't count for much. I got a disposable camera at the drugstore in town, the little cardboard Kodak kind, and I rigged it above my window frame, pointed down at the foundation, with a length of thread tied from the shutter button to a nail I'd driven into the mortar. Anybody who brushed against that section of wall would trip the shutter, and the flash would go off in their face. Night 6, nothing. Night 7, nothing. I started to think I'd scared whoever it was off for good, or that the new locks had done what the sheriff's visit hadn't. Night 8, at 3:10 in the morning, the whole room went white for a fraction of a second. Not a sound first, but light, a hard, flat boom of it flooding straight through the curtains and washing the ceiling and walls in a flash so sudden it felt like something physical, like a hand slapped across my eyes. I was already half sitting up before the dark rushed back in, and that's when the sound caught up to the light. Boots scrabbling hard against gravel and dry grass, fast, stumbling, a man moving like he'd been caught doing something he couldn't talk his way out of. I was out the back door in under a minute, but by the time I rounded the house, there was nothing there but the smell of cigarette smoke hanging in the cold air and tire tracks in the soft dirt of the lane leading out to the county road. Not a car, something narrower, a motorcycle, maybe, or a moped. I got the disposable camera developed at the drugstore 3 days later, because that's how long it took back then. 24 exposures, most of them blank test shots I'd wasted getting the rig set up right. But one frame, the last one, showed a face half turned away from the flash, caught mid-flinch. A man, maybe 50, thin with deep lines around his eyes and a gray stubble beard. I didn't know him. I took the photo straight to the sheriff's office. The deputy who'd come out before looked at it a long time. Then he pulled a file and set an old mugshot next to it, a booking photo from years back. Same face, younger. Dale Pruitt, he said. Did 2 stretches upstate. Burglary, mostly. Got out of Mansfield 8 months ago. They put a car on the road that night, parked down at the county line where Earl's property met mine, watching. Nothing happened for 4 nights straight. I started to think Dale had moved on, spooked by the camera, gone wherever men like that go when a place gets too hot for them. On the 5th night, the deputies weren't there. Budget, they said, couldn't justify the manpower forever. And that was the night the bells rang again, close to 2 a.m., and this time I didn't wait by the window. I went out the back door with the flashlight and the bat, and I followed the shape of a man moving fast across the field behind my house toward the old Pruitt tobacco barn that came with the property. I should have called the sheriff first, I know that now, but something in me needed to see this through. The barn hit me before I even got the door open. That smell old tobacco barns always carry, dust and creosote and decades of dried out leaf, thick enough to taste at the back of my throat. Inside it was darker than the yard had been, the kind of dark where your flashlight beam looks like a solid thing cutting through it instead of lighting anything up. The boards groaned under my boots loud enough that I figured he'd already heard me coming, and when the beam finally swung around and found him, he was crouched near the far wall, where a section of the old fieldstone foundation had crumbled away into a gap just wide enough for a man's forearm. He had something in his hand, a masonry chisel, short-handled, the kind you'd use to work mortar loose a little at a time so it wouldn't crumble the whole wall. And for 3 full seconds, neither of us said a word or moved, and I stood there with the bat gripped tight enough to hurt my knuckles, waiting to see what he was going to do with it. My whole body was ready for him to come at me. His wasn't. Instead, his arm just dropped, slow, like the chisel had gotten too heavy to hold up anymore, and it landed in the dirt beside him with a small, dull sound that seemed too quiet for how loud my own heart was going. He looked at me with the same flinching expression from the photograph, except this time there was nothing surprised about it. He looked tired, thinner than the mugshot, older around the eyes than 8 months out of Mansfield should have made him. He looked like a man who'd run out of places to be, and who'd known it for a while, before I ever showed up with a flashlight. "It ain't there anymore," I said, because somehow I already understood. Whatever Ray hid, bank cleared the place out before I bought it. "There's nothing here." He gave a short laugh that didn't have any humor in it. "Ain't about the bank." He nodded toward the gap in the stone, toward the chisel lying in the dirt. "Brick under your window. Took me 2 weeks to work that tin strip loose. Ray left it there for me before he passed. A key like, numbers scratched on it, told me where to start counting stones out from the barn door." He shook his head slow. "Should have known better. Should have known him better." "He told you where," I said, "and then he changed his mind about telling you the rest." Dale didn't answer that. He just knelt there in the dirt with his hand still hovering near the loose stone, like he was hoping I was wrong, hoping there was one more inch of wall he hadn't tried yet. Then he got up, slow, an old man's motion, even though he wasn't old, and he left through the back of the barn without another word, out into the dark toward the tree line, and he never came back to that property again. The sheriff's department looked for him for a while, checked bus stations in Cambridge and Zanesville, but Dale Pruitt seemed to know how to disappear. I heard later they never picked him up. I sold that house 2 years afterward. Couldn't shake the feeling of it, even after the visit stopped. But before I left, I did one more thing. I pried up that loose stone in the barn wall myself, curious despite everything, and found the space behind it empty except for a torn scrap of paper, brittle and yellowed, with 3 words written on it in pencil, in handwriting that wasn't mine and wasn't Dale's either. Not this one. That sent me looking, the way it must have sent Dale looking, all those nights he spent circling my house in the dark. I walked the foundation with a screwdriver and worked loose every joint that looked disturbed, every seam where the mortar sat a shade lighter than the brick around it. I found 3 more, one under a windowsill on the north side, one behind a loose field stone near the old cellar door, one tucked into a gap by the chimney base, so high up I had to stand on a bucket to reach it. Each one held the same thing, a small scrap of paper, blank, yellowed with age, folded down to nothing. No numbers, no map, no answer waiting at the end of it. Ray Pruitt hadn't hidden his money in that house at all, as far as I could tell. Or if he had, he'd buried the real place so deep under decoys that even his own brother, with a scavenger hunt Ray had built for him with his own hands, never got past the first false door. I think about that some nights, a man laying out a maze of empty pockets in his own walls, brick by brick, maybe out of spite, maybe out of some old grudge between brothers I'll never know the shape of, making sure that whoever came looking after he was gone would spend months, maybe years, prying stones out of a house that had already given up everything it had to give. I've wondered since if Ray hid more than one real thing in more than one real house, scattered someplace else entirely, and left this place standing here as nothing but bait. I've wondered if somewhere out past the county line, there's another loose stone, another wall, another man circling a house at 2 in the morning, working a chisel into mortar that was never going to give him what he came for. I never did find out. I just sold the house and let it be somebody else's problem and somebody else's noise in the dark.